Hi guys, so the reason it's a solo movie review today is that the film I'm going to do, or I'm reviewing, is only on at like 2 cinemas in central London at really stupid esoteric times, like 7 minutes past 3 in the morning. The film is Monsters and Men. It's a first-time film by Reinaldo Marcus Green, who is an alumni or a student of the great Spike Lee, who is now nominated for an Oscar for BlacKkKlansman. It stars John David Washington. He's probably the biggest name in it, and of course John David Washington is Denzel Washington's son and also the star of BlacKkKlansman. There's also strong support and equivalently leading parts played by Anthony Ramos and Kelvin Harrison. Now, this is a film that sits and occupies itself very firmly within the recent resurgence and blossoming, if you like, of Black American filmmaking. And it's about a neighborhood in New York in which Anthony Ramos, who's a Hispanic origins, who witnesses the shooting and films the shooting on his smartphone of a black guy in the neighborhood. We see a scene where Anthony Ramos's character Manny films and witnesses and then subsequently uploads the footage online. I mean, essentially it's a film that chops into 3 chapters, and there are 3 stories. There's the John David Washington story, and he's a New York cop, a black New York cop who's negotiating the really tricky balance between the sort of inherent sort of racism of the force. The film starts with a really powerful scene, I thought, of him being pulled over. At this point you don't know he's a cop. He has his license checked. You see him looking, it was a big close-up of his face looking in the rearview mirror, and you wonder which way it's going to go. And then at the end of this very long, sort of almost in real time sequence of the copper then going back to his car, checking his license, coming back to the car and giving him the all clear, he then reveals, as he places his badge on his lap, it's revealed to us that he's a cop. And it's interesting because, you know, later in the film a discussion happens between him and his partner, a white female cop, where they're talking about how many times they've been stopped. And it's just a very neat and very subtle way of illustrating the difference of what it means to be, you know, a black American versus a white American. So you've got John David Washington's character, and so he's in the force, and then you've got this event in which this guy is shot on a street corner in the neighborhood, and it's filmed. And then you've got the second story is of Anthony Ramos's character, Manny, uploading this film onto social media, and then the cops that were involved in the shooting subsequently pulling him up on sort of trumped up charges, and you feel that he's stitched up, and they infer that he's sold a gun to a friend. And what's weird about this film, and the reason I'm going to say this before I get onto the third story, because the third story is Kelvin Harrison's story, who plays Zurich, who's a young aspirant baseball player, is that each of these stories, you start with them, but then essentially at some point in the story, they're abandoned. So, you know, John David Washington, the cop, we see him go so far, and John David Washington has a sort of crunch moment. He has to cross this sort of bridge between, does he look after his job? Does he stand up for the rights of black people? Is he a whistleblower, essentially? Similarly, Anthony Ramos's character, the Hispanic boy who's filmed the event that's happened, he's toying with, should he upload it, run it with all the risks that entails? And then the final story is Kelvin Harrison Jr.'s, the actor playing Zurich, the baseball player. And he becomes mobilized and sort of caught up in the political movement that surrounds the aftermath of this guy's death. So, you know, there's a lot of protests, there's a pressure group, they want justice for the case, and he gets caught up in the sort of the politics of it. But all 3 stories are connected by the fact each character is facing a sort of Rubicon moment where they either have to decide to face and say something about the injustices that they've witnessed, seen, or fear are going on, or settle for the comfort of the life they could have. And that's where the title comes from. And the directors talked about this, saying, you know, I wanted to make something where, are you a monster for ignoring these things and just letting them go? Or are you a man for confronting them? And yet at the same time, there are moments in all the characters' stories where you're kind of, on the one hand, you're wanting them to blow blow the whistle and kind of uncover the awful unfairness and illegality of what's going on. You want them to confront it. And then another part of you, which is so clever about this film, is begging them not to, because you know that the consequences could be far worse than just the status quo. And yet, at the same time, it's a very successful film at showing you that the status quo are being constantly stopped. There are countless shots of young black kids, being stopped in the street, checked. And what's very clever about the way this film does all this street checking and random searches is that the police that do it are very, the process of them searching people, stopping and searching, is done in a very pedestrian way. It's very functional. I kept thinking they're going to frame them, they're going to plant something. No, and then at the end of it, they go, you go on your way, you look after yourself. And so there's nothing overtly unpleasant about the way the police are necessarily treating the guys that they're stopping, but there's something deeply unpleasant about the frequency and the low-level hum of constant sort of stigmatizing of just being black. So each of these characters have these sort of junctions, these moments, these splits in the road, these crisis points where they have to decide, do I go this way and keep the status quo going, or do I go that way and run the risk of upsetting everything? And I don't want to do too many spoilers. Obviously, John David Washington has the risk of, does he jeopardize his job and what he's got for his family versus his standing and status in the NYPD? And then you've got Anthony Ramos's character, Manny. Should he upload what he's filmed and he knows the injustice of the situation and run the risk of really upsetting the ants nest of the NYPD? And then you've got Kelvin Harrison, the young baseball player, who is, has a conscience and is politically motivated and can feel the injustice of this. And yet for him, his dad has done everything, has strived in every way to get him into the sessions so that he can potentially play for some of the national baseball teams. And there's one point where Kelvin Harrison's dad says to him, you're at a position where you could have a ticket out of here, meaning out of this life, at this level, this low-level hum of racism. You could have, success, you could reach out beyond it, and you could see his father willing him to not go on this march that happens towards the end of the film. And so it's a very subtle film. I mean, I'm guessing it hasn't been given a massive release because it doesn't have any major stars in it. And John David Washington, I understand, gave a month of research and prep to his part to this director for free. And that made me really respect John David Washington. I actually preferred John David Washington in this film to Black Klansman, because although I like Black Klansman, he was almost a bit of a caricature of himself and of the era. And that was the point of Black Klansman. But in this, I thought he played this cop who was sort of, riven with sort of, a conscience, but at the same time trying to work out how comfortable does he want his life and all this kind of stuff. I thought Kelvin Harrison, who played the young boy who was an aspirant baseball star, I thought he was remarkable. I mean, he not many words, not much script, but he inhabited this character. You felt him looking at the junctions of his life when he was stopped by the police, and he had a close escape because he had a small amount of spliff on him. And you could see here the choices he was making. You could see him forming his opinion. And I won't give away what happens at the end, but it's quite a poetic ending. In a weird way, the virtue of this film, the strength of this film, was how unconventionally it started narrative threads and kind of abandoned them. But then in a weird way, I thought, whilst that was frustrating in terms of it being a film and you want to follow these stories, you want some kind of closure, at the same time, it felt very lifelike, because what happens in the real world is you'll hear these stories and there'll be countless of them, and they do kind of just drift away and disappear from your consciousness. And so in that sense, certainly the fate of Manny, the Anthony Ramos character, who's the one who essentially puts the footage out there, I thought it was quite clever the way he sort of faded away and his story disappeared, but so too did John David Washington's story sort of fade away, and we were left with Kelvin Harrison, the young baseball boy's story towards the end. It was nicely shot, it was understated, everyone was committed, and it's one of those films that I know it did well at Sundance and what have you, but it's had such a micro release in London of all places that it beggars belief. You think all this wonderful effort that's gone into it. So Monsters and Men. If you get to see it anywhere, if you can see it on demand, if it pops up at one of your local cinemas, I assure you to go and see it. It's short, it's 93 minutes long. At times it reminded me of, Spike Lee did a film years ago called Do the Right Thing, which took a very different approach. Again, a slightly cartoon approach, which Spike Lee does. He's kind of he does sort of satirizes and caricatures eras. But Do the Right Thing sort of looked at the pressure cooker situation of a certain neighborhood, I think in Brooklyn or the Bronx, from the Italian, Hispanic and the black experience, and how it all sort of blows up over one summer. This was very different. It didn't have that same sense of tension, but I liked the way it painted the portrait of an everyday sort of neighborhood in New York, and the ways in which that neighborhood just has layers of patience just removed away from it, and what happens and how that stigmatizes a community and how that frustrates a community. And again, it was just another gently important, subtly important film, just to remind us that, you know, racism doesn't have to be overt, although it is overt in here. You know, a guy gets shot, but it doesn't have to be overt for it to have a very, very profound effect on the communities in which it happens. So a big shout out. This is a smart little film, and it's well worth your attention.
For more film and family fun, don't forget to click the subscribe button and make sure to click the bell to never miss an update.